Jennifer, we're ready for you to begin.
Okay. On. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Fairy Tales. Welcome back, and welcome if this is your first time. My name is Jennifer Fidel. I'm the Public Programming Director for CC Institute. And today we've got, we're going to hear from Patricia Llosa for our third in a series of 5. She's going to be speaking about the Ekeko. But before we begin with that, I just have a few things to go over. One is sound. If you have any trouble with your sound, we've got the sound going on this side, so it's probably something on your computer. Either switch to headphones or adjust your sound. But rest assured, we will be recording this, so you'll get a full recording at the end of before next time. And then also we have, if you have questions, Patricia's going to talk for a little while. She'll take some questions and comments at the end, and we'll ask you to put those into the chat screen. And that is a little icon in the bottom of your screen. There's a chat, and you can type in questions, and we'll take them from there. Otherwise, I'd like to remind next week we've got a presentation coming from Betty Mallett-Smith. I will be presenting that. Betty is going to be talking about the myth of Io. She's 95 years old. She lives on the West Coast, and so it was really tricksy to get her live. So I've been interviewing her for the last several weeks, and so I'll be hosting her next week. And this coming Tuesday, we've got Eduardo Carvalho speaking about Jung's Tower. That'll be this Tuesday at 8 p.m. And so I hope everyone joins us with that. And today, I think that's all we need to talk about. So I'm going to let Sylvia introduce Patricia. So Sylvia, if you would take it. Thank you.
Well, actually, it's Michael on the screen. Michael, you wanted to say some things before I did the introduction?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of words, please. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. As a person that started this over 31 years ago, there's a lot of responsibility to invite people whose work and whose nature you really respect. And I'm not sure what you're going to talk about, Sylvia. I'll just say one thing is that I had the wonderful opportunity of meeting Patricia about 2-3 years ago in Bogota at a conference where you presented. And I turned to the person, I think maybe you, Sylvia, I said, she's incredible. Her work is wonderful, her nature is wonderful, and she loves this. She loves working with psychics. She has a great sense of spirit. I want her to be part of the CC community. And I held that for a year, and then I asked you, and it's been wonderful ever since. And I'm very proud that you've accepted, and really happy you accepted the invitation to be part of the CC community. And I can't wait to hear the talk today. So welcome, Patricia.
Okay, y yo no soy Patricia, soy Silvia Barron, la directora de estudios internacionales, ¿verdad? Y de parte de Michael, de Jennifer y de todo el instituto les quiero dar a todos la bienvenida. Los de habla hispana, tutti che parlano l'italiano, die Deutsch sprechen, die Tanzkehlen, todos los idiomas que estén presentes aquí en el mundo, porque no solo hablamos idiomas, también estamos aprendiendo y hablamos el idioma de la psique. So first of all, what I'd like to do is welcome all of you, those of you who speak Spanish, French, Italian, German, Greek, Arabic. It doesn't matter what language you speak. You're also here because you're interested either in learning or already speak in various degrees the language of Psyche. Hoy tengo el gran placer y un honor tremendo de presentarles a ustedes la analista junguiana Patricia Llosa, en español argentino se dice Llosa, querida y admirada colega y amiga de alma. So today it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you the Jungian analyst Patricia Llosa, who is an admired and well-beloved colleague of mine, of Assisi, and a soul friend as well. Ya verán. Ella no solo fue entrenada en el Instituto de Jung como analista en Nueva York, ella entrenó también con Marion Woodman, la gran dama de cuerpo y alma. Y no solo trabajó en el Museo Metropolitano de Nueva York. Por 21 años antes de ser analista, ella ha recorrido el mundo siguiendo el baile de la psique. So you'll see. Not only is she a trained analyst in New York, she also trained with Marion Woodman, the grande dame of body and soul. Not only did she do that, she worked for 21 years at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.
Mm.
She has gone throughout the world following and listening to and following the dance of Psyche. Patricia vive, respira y se mueve en diferentes mundos, entre países e idiomas, pero el mundo que más le pertenece es el mundo en el corazón de ella y en el alma, es el mundo que se encontró en los templos de Asclepios, el mundo de la conexión vital, dinámica y profunda con la psique. Patricia lives, breathes, and moves in different worlds, not only in different countries and different languages, but the world that she most belongs to in her heart and in her soul is the world that we have found in the Asclepian temples, that place of vital and dynamic connection with Psyche. La semana pasada, después de la presentación de Gonzalo, ella me dijo, este es el corazón que bate en Assisi, el respeto y el amor por las manifestaciones de la psique. Last week after Gonzalo Himoib's presentation, she and I had a brief conversation, and she said, this is the world of the ancient Asclepian temples, of respect and love for Psyche that beats at the heart of Assisi. Mm. Y hoy van a experimentar todos cómo Patricia baila con las imágenes, cómo les da forma y captura el movimiento de la psique en materia. Vamos a viajar lejos y profundamente con Patricia. So today you're going to get to experience how Patricia dances with the images, how she gives them form and captures the movement of Psyche and matter. We're going to travel far and we're going to travel deeply with Patricia Llosa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael and Sylvia and Jennifer, for conceiving of this series. I'm so deeply touched, and this is such a vulnerable time, and you've almost brought me to tears. I've never been welcomed in a way that felt so much like home. I really appreciate that. And I hope with all of these alojos that I can offer to all of you who are at home now in this new form, something of the distant lands of the Andes and the Aymara folklore, which is where I'm going to be traveling with you today. I'm going to be talking about a figure who's called the Ekeko, and I hope that you've already met him if you've had a chance to look at the short film, Little Wishes, that I sent out ahead of time. But if you didn't have a chance to watch it, you will have a chance to meet him today, and maybe you'll go back and visit that. So using this figure of the Ekeko, I want to circumambulate the themes of reciprocity and generativity and hybridity. The patroness, the woman that I consider the patroness of this series beyond Jennifer and Assisi is, of course, as Jennifer mentions in the introduction, Marie-Louise von France. And she says that with fairy tales and folklores, we get the blueprint for a deeper meaning. The blueprint for deep meaning. The archetypal field that is larger than ourselves. Now, I hope many of you are also lovers of fairy tales. I imagine you are, or you wouldn't be here today. But I've been taken back to thinking about my earliest experiences with fairy tales, and remembered that one of the earliest books that I owned was this Dover edition of the Blue Fairy Book. And it came from my American grandparents as I was growing up in Peru. And as I was preparing for our gathering and talk today, I started to understand in retrospect that it's this sort of spell-binding quality of the archetypal patterns that are woven in these tales that were really crucial to helping me navigate the disparate cultural worlds that I grew up in, being a half and half in Peru, American mother and Peruvian father. But I'd like to take that further, just thinking of how we're all a group from so many parts of the world, and how we've all found our home in the psyche and in the study of the psyche, and that's what's brought us all together here. There's something about the work of depth psychologies that takes us beyond the behavioral level of culture to something that is, again, primordial and deep. So fairy tales and folklore really give us this basic pattern of the human psyche through an overlay of cultural material. And so the cultural material that we're going to be looking at today is, again, from the highlands of the Andes, an area called the Altiplano or the Puna, and it's about over 12,000 feet in general. And I'm going to introduce you to our protagonist for the day. Let me just do that. Here we go. Let's see. Can you see him? I'm expecting an answer, but I guess it's a great silence. There we go. Okay. Yes, thank you to the chat. So I'm introducing you here to this gentleman. And his name is Ekeko. I just took off his hat. And I want to, first of all, we're going to give him a cigarette. Oop, hold on. And we're just going to give him a little bit of alcohol, which he's very fond of. So this is Ekeko, and if any of you are familiar with Andean garb, you're going to notice that he's wearing a chullo, which is this hat, again, which is now very popular around the world, but originated in the Andes. And you see the little parts that go over the ears. And he's wearing these ojetas, which are, oh, that you can't see so well. He's wearing ojetas, which are sandals made out of recycled rubber tires. And it's kind of hard to see, but he's wearing a white shirt, which is very much telling us that he's no longer, from an agricultural world, but he's sort of established as someone who's part of the everyday bureaucracy. And you see that he wears bright colors, but mostly you don't see more than his head or his toes, because he's got all of this abundance of packages, as you see. And I just want to tell you a little bit about them. Let's see. I mean, he's got a lot of money. He's got this for celebration. This is a kind of food. More food. He's got a television here, which is kind of hard to see, and a house. More food. This is a mattress. He's got his pasta. More food. He's got a car up here. And then he has a heart here for good health. And then he's got his cigarettes, which he's very fond of. And sort of all kinds of things in order to feed himself. So I wanted you to meet him, unless if you haven't met him already in the film. So, you know, what is this crazy cornucopia? Let's see if I can keep him a little bit in the field. There we go. There we go. Now he's with us. So this crazy cornucopia of packages, you know, he's carrying everything that one would need for a healthy and enjoyable life. And what we've just done is activate him as a generative figure, because he's a cultivator. And we've offered him alcohol and a cigarette. And now usually that happens on Tuesdays and Fridays, but today is a special occasion. So what I'd like to tell you about him is his importance in a basic Andean ethos, which is the ethos of Agni, or reciprocity, and the importance there of exchange. And Agni is part of the dual thought structure of the Andean world. And it's expressed through complementary opposites, like male and female, sun, moon, gold, silver. But this interaction, the dance of the interaction, is called Agni. Today for you, tomorrow for me. And this ethos and this practice, because it is a practice, and that's one of the things that I hope you'll take away from the encounter with him, is that this living practice of reciprocity creates a living and harmonious relationship between nature and man. Now, the Ekeko is a figure that has been known as a dwarf to sort of live in the sacred spaces of the Andes. Certain mountains are sacred spaces where rituals of exchange can take place. And these sacred spaces are called apachetes or achachiles. And the Aymara people go to these sacred places in the mountains and have an exchange with nature, and leave food and offerings with nature. And this is actually where the tradition began. The Ekeko is a much later manifestation of this. But he comes from a sense of the spirit of the distant ancestors. And what we're going to talk about today is the Fair of the Alacitas, which takes place on the 24th of January every year in La Paz, Bolivia, and is the day when thousands of people gather from all over Bolivia, hundreds of thousands of people, to venerate him and to participate in this ritual exchange of reciprocity, of offering something in exchange for something else, and sort of maintaining the circularity of the one could say the basic pattern of life, and the basic pattern of the dance. So Ekeko is he's masculine, as you can see. He's got his mustache, and only recently has there been an attempt to create a female Ekeko, but traditionally he's masculine, and he's reminiscent of volcanic gods because of his desire to have the fire and be activated by spirit. And he actually represents an evolution of the pre-Columbian god of abundance. It's this evolution that has shifted in form, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about his hybridity. But he's seen as a sort of trickster. Oops, there goes some of his cigarette. He's seen as a trickster and an ambiguous figure, kind of like Hermes. And he's also known sort of in the local parlance as a Turk, because Turks were known as peddlers throughout the Altiplano, and he has so many resources. He was seen as a peddler, like the traveling Turks who would bring all kinds of special goods that were beyond agricultural to the different towns in the Altiplano. Oops, sorry. So Ekeko and I have known each other for many years now, but that wasn't always the case. And one of the things that that I'm very excited about that Assisi is doing is opening up so much of their community and their work with South America. And I'm so happy to see so many Latin Americans here today. And I think there's been, at least when I was growing up, there was really a lot of racism, which of course continues to this day, but a sort of a tremendous derision towards anything that was indigenous, and a terrific split between indigenous and modern Western attitudes. And luckily this is changing, but what I find is that it's very difficult to find out information about Andean folk tales. There's a lot of complexity around, first of all, mostly oral tradition, and there's very little that's written, and there's a lot of hiding because of the colonial layer historically. So there's a lot of hiding of information, and maybe in a way what Gonzalo was talking about last time, there's this synthesizing that happens, and so there's many different narratives that are all coming together, and it's hard to find out information about events that or rituals that are actually quite common. And so, for example, I don't think there isn't any book that's been written on the Ekeko, even though he's so popular. And so all of this, all of the sort of the folk tales, the rituals, the material, a lot of the material that is so rich in the archetypal valence that we're interested in Latin America, at least from my experience, was not easily accessible. So I had, seen Ekekos around in Peru, but I didn't know much about them besides the fact that they were this odd kind of generative figure that was, sold to tourists. So my encounter with him was, again, very much like the sort of the little figure, mercurial nature of who he is himself. I was at the home of a wonderful Latin American singer named Susana Vaca. And if you haven't heard her, she's definitely one of the voices of soul of Latin America, an Afro-Peruvian singer. And she's actually won some Latin Grammys. But I was at her home, and her husband is Bolivian, and he was missing home, and it happened to be the 24th of January. And so he gave me a tiny, tiny little dollar as a gift because he wanted to be participating in the exchange. And I actually had it here, but it's so tiny that I've lost it. It's disappeared. Again, the tiny is always mercurial. But as you see here with the Ekeko, this dollar here is actually quite huge compared to the tiny little dollar that he gave me. And I was so intrigued by this tiny little thing. I held on to it, and in true archetypal or fairy tale fashion, it took me 3 years before I actually decided to follow the trail of this tiny little dollar and make my way to see what this Alacitas Ekeko fair was about. All I knew was that it was a fair of miniatures. So let's see, I think maybe I'll share with you some images from the fair. I would love to know, I mean, I can't hear you, but would those of you who've seen the film put up your hands? So maybe half of you. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to share screen. Hold on a minute. So I'm going to start here with this image just of the altiplano and the puna to sort of bring you back to a sense of the geography of where this is all happening.
Patricia, no se ve
yeah.
nada. No se ve nada.
Okay. Whoop. Thank you.
No, nada.
Let's try one more time. There, let's see. Now? Can you see it now?
No, no sé lo que pasa. Can't see it.
Okay. Well, then I will tell you about it. So I want to tell you about the experience and the sort of feel of the day. And the day starts, it basically goes from 9 to 10. And oh, somebody's sharing something? Oh, that's strange. Sorry. Oop. The day basically goes from 9 in the morning to 9 in the evening. And the most potent time is 12 noon. And at 12 noon, the sun, of course, is directly overhead and brings to bear generativity and blessing for the whole day. But during that day, what happens is that people from their own homes make little objects, such as those that you've seen on the Ekeko. And some people make them, you know, like the car or the house, right? Some people make them at home by hand. Children make them. There's a whole group of prisoners. There's a whole sort of I would say group, but a whole direction of prisoners who make the little miniatures. And so it's a tremendous market of miniatures. And very much like the Shawabti of ancient Egypt. I don't know whether any of you know the Shawabti, but the Shawabti are these tiny little figurines that were placed in Egyptian burials, and each one of them was very particular for some particular duty. There'd be one that would say, you know, I'm Amun Re and I clean the king's shoes on Tuesday, or I'm Amun something else and I clean the king's shoes when Amun Re is sick. I mean, I'm saying, you know, I'm telling it to you like that because what's amazing is the particularity, the level of particularity of each one of these little figures. And that's the same experience of going to this market of miniatures or market of dreams, is a tremendous sense of the particularity of these miniatures. So this Ekeko doesn't have a computer, but I saw there you can buy a computer that's a Dell, or you can buy a computer that's a Mac. And again, that particularity in and of itself is fascinating, I think. You can, you know, if you saw the film, you saw that one could buy a rooster if one needed a husband. One could buy bricks and mortar to build a home. One could buy degrees. One could buy a baby. One could buy a marriage certificate, or all kinds of, I mean, just about anything you could ever imagine. It sort of runs the gamut, which is kind of fascinating, from, you know, tiny little things of toothpaste or a ticket, you know, to travel around the world. So that's sort of the scope of the miniatures and the particularity. And all of this actually originates from an exchange, again, the sense of reciprocity that was originally done with stones. So it's quite fascinating, and I'm not sure where, you know, when and where, and I can't find anything on it, this moment of this shift from the particularity from the stones and sort of the imagination of the stones standing for different desires, or maybe it's just a general wish for a kind of generativity that's become mercantilized in our more less agrarian society, so that there's not just the request for general generativity, but for you know, particular things. Maybe it's part of our mall culture, but that, from what I've been able to gather in different places, that basically started around the 1940s. But previously, all of the exchanges and all of the gifts for the Ekeko were with stones, and these little stones were called ilias, and they were often very carefully sought out for, you know, over the Andean plains, and people would collect them and have just beautiful stones to exchange as a symbol of generativity. So that's kind of the impression, sort of a tremendous bustling impression of exchange. And what one does is, nowadays one doesn't necessarily exchange with people sort of as gifts, which has happened in the past, but one actually exchanges with money, right? But all of the miniatures are very inexpensive. And the other thing that I thought was so fascinating was, and then maybe it has to do with sort of the human size of the Ekeko, and that, you know, he can only carry so much. But in general, people were not going crazy, you know, when they would go shopping. I mean, it would be, you know, it sort of seemed to be one thing at a time that I was witnessing. You know, you bought a big truck and you bought foodstuffs, or you bought, you know, some people wanted to travel. So they bought suitcases and a passport and dollars or money that they could, or euros. but it's very interesting to see that there wasn't a sense in general of, which I came in with from the United States, which was I wanted to buy a miniature of everything. Very, very much a miniature mall rat. So I think another aspect of this figure that I've grown very fascinated, especially with the analytic work, is how he represents a kind of incubation. He really carries these intentions or these dreams, and I think I initially thought of it as a market of dreams, but really it's a way of focusing and having a reciprocal relationship to your own focus and to your own relationship to maybe the longing of individuation, or to the longing for the growth of the psyche, or even just sort of aspects of the self, of growth that one wants him to hold and keep alive, just the way in the analytic work we come and we sit and we bring different aspects of our shadow, of our lives, and we hold them in that under the sort of the analytic or the alchemical heat of the analytic space, and they incubate and they grow. And of course, as I was saying, from the point of view of the natural way that I saw these thousands of people not buying everything up, the same way when we come into the analytic room, we're working on one piece of a dream or one piece, and slowly it kind of unfolds in a very sort of spiral-like way. And I think this is something that I found a real resonance with the Ekeko as a figure that lives in people's homes and is constantly cared for, so that you care for him, you support him, you give him what he needs, and he in turn gives you what you need. But I think in a way, even just the focus of remembering what it is that you're going after is an aspect of what he's incubating. So I see him as a cultivator and an incubator, sort of holding the larger self. I don't know whether you saw in the film, but one of the things too that was very interesting was to see there was a group of people that were actually doing a ritual enactment. There's a sort of a tremendous sense of play, and the Ekeko is very much a kind of again, because he's a dwarf, he has that sort of childlike energy, and it was interesting to see people do this kind of enactment and play as if that they were paying away their debts. And there's something about playing it and living the possibility in an imaginative way that I found to be very attractive. There's certain words that were used also by the different shamans who were blessing both the Ekeko or the different objects, and they talk about the importance of putting flower petals, and again having that generative sense of how the flower petals help this to flourish and to grow. So I just want to check in with everybody. Were there any problems with I was seeing there was a lot of chatting going on. Oh, someone found a picture of the small dollar. That's great. I must say, I've got to tell you guys, this is very, very weird. It's so strange. I don't know if it is for you, but it's so strange not to be able to feel you more, you know? So I appreciate the strangeness of this time, probably on your end as well. Anyway, so I want to go into speaking about the Ekeko as a dwarf, and go back to Marie-Louise von Franz. In her studies, she concluded that 85% of published references to dwarfs are positive, even though they sometimes reflect cunning and childish impulses, as I had just mentioned. Certainly the Ekeko can also be a trickster, and you may have remember that from the film as well, when I was talking to a taxi driver who was telling me about his Ekeko, and he said, you know, you've got to be careful if you're a single person and you bring someone into your home of the other sex. The Ekeko is not really pleased, which was very surprising to me. I hadn't encountered this sort of trickster duality, sort of the Hermes side of him. And again, all of the information that I've gathered really comes from these odd encounters and moments of just trying to talk to people and finding the living folklore, the living mythology, because again, it's really an oral tradition, which is very different from Europe. So going back to the Marie-Louise von Franz, she talked about the importance of the dwarf as a positive figure of a good idea or a hunch, or also a hunch that is so small that it can be easily overlooked. So it can either lead people, you know, it can be kind of like a eureka, or it can lead people to creative solutions, or at the same time, it can be something that, you know, you don't take note of that little thing and then you end up paying a heavy price for it, right? And as I said, the Ekeko is also punishing to those who do not respect him. People advise you not to get an Ekeko if you're not going to take care of him. Traditionally, you know, looking at the myths and sort of dwarfs through the ages, again, in ancient Egypt, dwarfs were the jewelers and keepers of linen and objects, and they were, excuse me, they were very, very respected. I think they were most respected, if you look historically, dwarfs were most respected in ancient Egypt and least respected in the culture of Germany in the 1940s. But Egyptian there's a very important dwarf god in ancient Egypt called Bes, and he's the protector of childbirth. And people would place a little statue of Bes on the forehead of a woman in childbirth. Additionally, Bes, very much like the Ekeko, was incredibly fond of beer and music and dance and laughter. And that's something I found as I've been working and sort of moving around the dwarf images, what a Dionysian quality he has, perhaps because he's so earthy. We'll talk about the earthy later. But midwives were often dwarfs because they had such tiny little hands. And so there were a lot of companions of Bes who were female, little female dwarf figures. And our Ekeko has midwife-like qualities too. I mean, he helps us gestate and manifest our dreams. So if we go to the stories of the Brothers Grimm, in their Teutonic mythology, they describe dwarves as being superhuman, which approximates them to the gods. And they have the power to hurt man and to help him. And at the same time, they stand in awe of him because they're no match for the bodily strength of man, because their figure is so much below their stature or mishapen. Then when you think of, again, sort of the earthy quality of dwarves, or dwarves being close to the earth, just from the point of view of their stature, the goddess Pele is a famous female dwarf, and she was born from her mother's thighs in dwarf form, and very much like the Ekeko is sometimes said to be connected to a volcano. She too is a volcanic deity. Another figure who resonates with the dwarf connection to the earth is the Egyptian god Ptah, who was known as the risen earth, and he was also the god of craftsmanship, and he was said to make the earth by visualizing it, just as the Ekeko holds the vision of the offerings he's laden with. The dwarfs of the north, in the Eddic sagas, whenever they died, would be remade out of earth. And dwarfs are not only made of earth, as in those sagas, but they can be seen as subterranean beings, and they're not able to tolerate the light of day. And because of this, they can often appear in fairy tales as miner or metal craftsmen. And of course, you remember the 7 dwarfs who are miners who help Snow White as she's in that sort of in-between mining state before she ends up with her prince. But in her transformational process, she's living with these dwarfs. Jung says that the depths of the earth and that heavy metals are they're the very soul of the earth, and that this is a way that dwarfs and their earthiness can really connect us to a sense of what constitutes the self. So I'm going to stop for a minute and just see what is going on with your questions. And just say, well, Pele is born from her mother's thigh. I can see that. And then I can't see all of your questions. I could just see a few. So I just thought I would respond to those. And I want to take a little break from sort of this exposition of seeing the dwarf as the Ekeko as a dwarf, getting the sense of his his stature and his density and his compactness, and how his compactness also gives a sense of an intensive generativity that's just ready to grow, and just the sense of the vitality and the fire and the kind of again, the sense of tremendous receptivity, which you can see it even in his, even in how he stands. Strangely enough, one could say he looks like some of the ancient gods of Tiahuanacu. They stand out like this with their arms wide. There's also the Christ position, which is, again, the position of the tension of the opposites. But I think it's very interesting that his position is one of openness, like an open heart, and vulnerability in a certain way. And I've always been fascinated by the way he stands and his position. And I have a feeling that that's probably related to the deeper connection to his roots in the Aymara mythology rather than his more present day form. That's kind of like a little hidden thing. But I'm going to tell you now, we're going to get to the tale of his origin. So I'm going to take this time to tell you a story. So maybe take a moment to just drop into story space. And we're going back in time. And the year is 1781, even though that's already telling you that this story is a hybrid, because in a certain way, time doesn't matter. It's kairos, not chronos. But we're already having here the hybridity of the fact that this tale and this folk tale is coming from a place of the hybrid encounter of two worlds. And so already in the beginning, as I'm telling it to you, we have two senses of time. The year is 1781, so there's history is important, is what this is telling us. At the same time, it's the time of Kairos. And I'm just going to get some water. It's the time of Kairos. And imagine that you are up in the high plains of the mountain region of the Andes, in the Altiplano, and the horizon is stretching out endlessly. And all you can see is the wide blue sky and yellow grasses blowing in the wind. Perhaps a herd of alpaca will dot the landscape, meandering slowly as they chew on the grass. We've got our little alpacas meandering slowly. Off they go, stage left. There's a large body of water as dark as ink in the distance, and it's the highest body of water in the world. Lake Titicaca, black as ink and continuous like a black mirror. Titicaca means the white puma. And out of this lake emerged the sun god in all his glory. His name is Viracocha, and there may be a connection to the Ekeko and him, but that's in times long, long past. And that's a story for another time. So the air is thin and crisp, and we're at 12,000 feet. And as the story goes, hold on a minute, our protagonist, a beautiful, stocky young man of strong profile and wide shoulders, named Isidoro Choquehuanca, was in love with an equally beautiful young woman. Oops, there she goes. You can see she's pink. Archetypal valence. This beautiful young woman wore her long black hair traditionally in braids that met in a bow at her back, the way the Aymara wear their hair. Her name was Paulita, and together Isidoro and Paulita roamed the hills and cavorted in ways that we don't have to get detailed about. Needless to say, there was a delicious union. And anytime you get a sense of a delicious union in a story like this, right? I see someone nodding. Uh-huh. You can feel the ripple of Schadenfreude of the gods, right? So it's not going to come as any surprise to you that this idyll was interrupted and that Paulita learned from her parents that she would have to leave everything she knew and go work for her living in the distant capital city of La Paz. There she would work and receive tutoring in return for food. she was going to be living with Doña Josefa Ursula de Rojos Foronda. Okay, that just gives you a sense of the whole Spanish, the layers of belonging. I think it's very interesting that all of the Spanish, how do I say it? Sorry, I start thinking about Spanish and then I want to speak in Spanish, but Spanish names always give you the maternal line and the paternal line. And that's very much connected to, again, this sort of imposition and the colonial rule. You have to know who everyone is and whose family came from where, and sort of, it's all part of that power dynamic. So there she is with Doña Josefa and Don Sebastián de Segurola. Now, this was not just working for anyone. Don Sebastián was no less than the governor and commander of arms of the city of La Paz. So again, like fairy tales, we don't know what connections she had or how she got there, but she got there. So tears were shed and chests were beaten and promises were made to seal their love. And Isidoro gave Paulita a little statuette. I'm assuming that you all know what that statuette would be of. A little dwarf. Off Paulita went, walking for several days over the mountain passes to this great sunken bowl where the city of La Paz rests amid the Cordilleras. Now, as destiny would have it, again, not long after she arrived in La Paz, there was a tremendous indigenous movement and an uprising, and the city was surrounded by over 40,000 men who were recruited by a famous revolutionary named Tupac Katari, who was following in the wake of Tupac Amaru, who was a Peruvian revolutionary. And they were rebelling against the Spanish crown. So what happened? The city was cut off from supplies, and water and food were increasingly scarce. People were panicked, and a terrible pall took over the city. Definitely there's a pall now, isn't there? Just reading that and thinking of that. So, a time of scarcity. So, our heroine, Paulita, did not suffer any of this, actually, because her beloved Isidoro had become a revolutionary. Now, I don't know if he was so upset that she'd left, but anyway, he'd been recruited into the Tupac Katari army, and every night he would secretly pass the defense lines, creeping by the sentries to bring food to his beloved. The story goes that Paulita, anguished by seeing the suffering of her mentors, and that they did not have enough to eat, decided to bring them food because she was getting this secret stash through Isidoro. But she was very concerned about how she could do this without putting Isidoro in danger. So what she decided to do was she took the little dwarf that Isidoro had given her and said to her teachers and her mentors, "This is a God of abundance, and look at what he's done. He has brought this food. I've prayed to him, and this is manifested, and there is food for you to eat in spite of the tremendous scarcity." Now, according to the way the story is told, the Segurolas accepted this explanation without question. And they were so grateful to this Andean god, who, I've neglected to mention, was actually presented naked with a huge erect penis, since he was the god of abundance, joy, and also fertility. And you will see here something the Ekeko does not have. It's been lost in translation or lost in transition. Anyway, to get to the end of our story, after several months of siege, the Spanish army arrived in La Paz, and the city was liberated. The question is, who's happy about that, right? But the city was liberated, and the terrible hunger that the rest of the population had suffered had not affected Don Sebastián de Segurola and his wife. And they were considered to be so grateful and to have such open hearts that they decided that they wanted to pay tribute to this pre-Columbian god who had saved them. And so they named a day for his celebration, which originally was on the day of the founding of La Paz, but then over time was moved to the 24th of January, which is the day of the Alacitas and the day of the exchange and the day that the Ekeko is celebrated. So that's the Ekeko's origin story. But, and it's sort of, passed down again orally, hand to mouth. But I think one of the things that's very problematic about this is to ask, who tells the story, who collects the story, who's the narrator, or who do you think you're telling the story to? All of those points of view have created a really complex narrative. And again, it's really, I guess, I want really to focus on how when we're dealing with a lot of folk tales and material of this kind from Latin America, there is this clash of cultures, there is this hybridity. And I was actually looking at the use of the word hybridity or criollismo, which is another word that's used to speak of things and events and rituals that are a mix of Spanish and Latin, or the word that was used last week in the wonderful talk on the gods of Santeria, which was syncretism. All of these are different approaches to how to understand this encounter. And certainly, I think I've used hybridity more because I myself am a hybrid, or I think of myself as a hybrid, and hybrid is a term that comes out of racial studies. So hybrid is one way. Synchronistic or synchronism is really a term that's used in the realm of ritual and religion, and criollismo is or Creole is used in other contexts. So I just wanted you to think about, again, the construction of this tale, because there are archetypal elements and yet so much is hidden. So one of the patterns that I see is that basically there's a couple that's in love and they're indigenous. So there's this union, and we could see it as the union of the native world before the Spanish arrive. And then that union is separated. And the feminine, the woman goes in one direction to be educated, and the man goes in another direction and is sort of rebellious. And we have these two different ways of dealing with the colonial structure. Yet these two different ways are secretly connecting and feeding and supporting each other, right? There's that way in which he manages to bring food. And then it's through the feminine, through her, that a connection of compassion is made, or of relatedness in some way, where she tries to help the colonial master. So I don't know if that's, it's sort of a position of submission or of adaptation on the one hand. And, what she gets from that is, again, this whole connection ends up creating the hybrid situation, or the situation where, we have the God who's being honored. I mean, he no longer has the generativity, he no longer has the huge erect penis, the way the ancient God, manifestations of Hermes did. And he no longer has the same vitality. He's covered up in a way with this this outfit that's very bureaucratic, that's not agricultural. But I like to think, again, that the position that he takes and his stand and that openness is something that is pre-colonial. I also wanted to bring in something that Jung says about the hybrid. And he talks about the hybrid as unified discord. And I think it's an interesting way to look at many different manifestations in Latin America. That sense of the unified discord, and where is the discord and where is the unification and who does it serve? This whole folktale is really an awkward construction that mostly favors the victors, and the victors are still the victors, which is colonial rule. So I would just ask you to think about, is the Ekeko a hybrid, or is he in disguise? How do you see the unified discord? I would be interested in hearing when we open up a bit for questions. Another aspect of the hybridity, I think that's really interesting, if you remember from watching the film, that this event takes place in a plaza, which is actually the sacred space. Originally, the Aymara and the Quechua people would parade their ancestors and mummies around the central plaza. So, of course, what the Spanish did, as is always done by victors, is they placed their churches at the central plaza. So it was easy from the point of view of geographic space to have the old God and the new God be collapsed together, right? But if you notice in the film, it's really fascinating that there's, in front of the church, there's a whole bunch of priests, and they have buckets, and they're blessing everything and anyone who comes up to them. But the priests stand outside of the church. The Ekekos are never allowed inside. But what's fascinating is that the church comes out for the Ekeko, which is a fascinating thing. I mean, I've shown this film to some people who are theologians, and they were amazed and horrified, but they were really couldn't believe their eyes when they saw sort of the move that the priests make to engage in this. And there's a kind of mercurial hybridity that goes on too, because there's so many people that you don't know who's blessing what. Is someone going and having their object or their Ekeko blessed by a Yatiri, who is a priest, a shamanic priest, or by a Catholic priest? And it's interesting to think, who chooses what? And there's this tremendous movement of humanity, and in a way, one can also hide there. You can go to the Yatiri and not to the priest, or you can go to the priest and not to the Yatiri, but it's all moving together. So I think it's a very interesting liminal space. And of course, a nice little touch here, if you think of, again, following the movement of the psyche, is that the church there is the church for St. Francis of Assisi. The Church of San Francisco is over the plaza where all of this takes place. So there's a sense of the generativity and the reciprocity and exchange that happens one-on-one that we've talked about and that we did with the Ekeko. But there's also another layer which is so incredible, is the communal experience of everybody being out together in this participation of reciprocity, as though they're raising the level of reciprocity for everyone, you know? And yeah, it's not sort of, there's a sense of, again, it's particular and it's communal at the same time. The level of the Aini and the reciprocity, right? It's today for me, tomorrow for you, in a larger and cosmic level as well. And I think someone said something in the chat about how that resonates with what we're living right now. And I certainly think there's a tremendous resource in this experience of reciprocity that exists in Latin America. Now, there's something that I do want to touch on briefly, which is the sense of the issue of appropriation of culture, which is so alive right now. And I understand what an important dialogue that is. The way I understand this, for me, as a white woman, well, and a Jungian, is that basically I'm following the movement of the psyche, or what Rafael Lopez Pedraza talks about as the therapeutic value of the movement of the image. And because some people have asked me, why did you go there? And are you appropriating the Ekeko? And my sense is that I'm participating in this exploration and this dance around what it means to be a hybrid and what hybridity is in Latin America. What is it now, especially as they're more and more, again, with global culture, what it's an exploration of hybridity and how we, I do think I was initially very spellbound by the ritual, but it's become a deeper and deeper question of how do we all take in each other's difference, and how do we live that? And certainly there's a wonderful book on dwarves. I'll put it in the chat later that I read, and I thought it's important to mention that there I read that dwarves themselves were defining themselves as different and as being able to teach about difference because of the obvious difference in them, in their stature, and that they identified it as teachers of difference. So my approach to all of this is, Jung also talks about, and Marie-Louise von Franz too, the importance of the feeling quality of the phenomenon. And so for me, what's primary is that it's the feeling about this and the movement of the engagement at the level of the deep psyche that is leading me. These little einfalls, or these little things like the little dollar bill, or these little moments of throwaway where you think, oh, should I go? Should I not go? Should I do this? That you begin to listen to, and that you begin to have an ear for, which take you on a path that is unexpected, and it's maybe listening a bit to the irrational. I guess I just wanted to say a few words about Jung and dwarves, because he was fascinated with the dactyls of classical antiquity and the homunculus of the alchemists and the alchemical Mercurius from his earliest years. And I'm sure you remember the story of his little mannequin, that he carved out and placed it to be held, or maybe even, to have an emotion incubated in that little pencil box. And then he hid it in the attic and forgot about it for years. And he describes that somewhere. He says, ultimately, the mannequin was a kabir, wrapped in his little cloak, hidden in the kista, and provided with a supply of life force, the oblong black stone. Again, there you have also an image of hybridity, because you have the little mannequin and the black stone. And I think part of Jung's journey is that then you see that the little mannequin and the black stone become one later on in his creation of the figure of Ka. But I want to go back to what follows, I think, after the little mannequin that he made and hid, that he encounters it in a way, I think, again, in his first active imagination, which starts in a dark cave with a dwarf with leathery skin who guides him through his journey, I think, to the Red Book. He's kind of the initiator of that whole work. And much later, you may remember that he found a stone that was the wrong stone, but the right stone. And he saw an indentation on it. And so he carved a little homunculus in it. And that stone he then places at the doorway of his tower at Bollingen, which Eduardo is going to be talking about on Tuesday night. And he calls this figure, this homunculus, the pointer of the way. So I think when I'm telling you about the Ekeko and my sense about appropriation and that sort of level of dialogue, I see the Ekeko as the pointer of the way. He's sort of led me on a journey that's taken me through many meanderings that have led me to be here with you today. Jung also speaks of the Kabirois. He was passionate about them. He wrote about them to Freud. He talks about how they're small and slight, but great in might. And unfortunately, the slides didn't work for me, but I did have, if you go and look at the Red Book, you'll find, for example, in the wonderful image where there's a little palace in the corner, and the dragon has been slain, and you see these little flowers growing up. If you look at the center of the flower, you will see a little seated kabiroi, just a little seated dwarf. Also, the sense of almost the point. It's like the flower is moving upward, and the point of movement is the kabiroi. So he is, again, the pointer of the way. But what I said before about the black figure, he carves a black figure that he names Ka. And you can also see that, again, I had a picture, but you can find it there's a book that was done last year by the Jung family on the art of C.G. Jung. And you can see the figure of Ka, because he's not, I don't think he was much published before. He was part of the Jung family's personal materials. So this Ka is a sort of a tall sculpture. He's about the size of this Ekeko, and he's dark black with bright red. And Jung calls him his embodied soul. He says, in my fantasy, the Ka soul comes from below, out of the earth, out of a deep shaft. And I love the way he says he makes everything real. And it reminded me of the shamans in La Paz, who, as they bless the objects in the Ekeko, they say, se hace realidad, se hace realidad, se hace realidad. It becomes real, it becomes real. So there's something, again, about the earthiness and the body. And again, what I had mentioned to you earlier about how Jung talks about the metallic nature of the center of the earth and how that connects to the self as something that cannot be destroyed, and from the depths.
Patricia,
Mm-hmm.
Teron, you're speaking from the depths. And
Okay, and it's time.
It is time, and let me just hold on for 1 second.
Right.
Unfortunately, Michael had to leave to
mhm.
attend another meeting. However,
Yeah.
let me tell you what Michael has asked me to share with you. And these are his words, and I'm quoting.
Yeah.
He says, "Thank you so much. You are such a value to bring in the spirit and the image to life and to allow us to participate with the animating spirit of the symbol. Thank you for this gift and contribution." And that's not the only thing that he said. And that is, you have such a wealth, such a richness, such an unbelievable depth to what you have to bring that we may just have to have you back.
Yay.
So,
I'd love to be back.
and so I know that Jennifer is going to be contacting you, but I express also my gratitude for your presentation, and then I will let Jennifer have the last word.
Mhm.
Thank you, Patricia. That was just so beautiful, really rich. And I know you said you felt like this was so weird and you really couldn't connect with us, but on my side, I know it was just, felt very connected to what you were saying. And you've really made this little Ekeko come alive for me, and I'm sure many others here. It's the second time I've heard you talk about this, and boy, I've learned a lot more this time. It's just such a rich story. And I appreciate so much your creativity and your play and the way you brought it together. So yes, definitely we want to have you back, and I hope that can happen.
Great. Thank you all. And some of the questions that you have are possible to get the slides. We will work on that if that's possible. We'll make it happen. And perhaps other images.
Sure.
Great.
And I guess, you know, a lot of the richness of the day you can find again on in the film. And again, thank you so much for listening in these strange times. And
Buenas tardes.
buenas tardes.
Chao, chao.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Okay. No te vayas, espera.